You were never supposed to be remembered by history. Just another hungry child born in the smoke-filled huts of 16th century Germany, nameless, faceless, and destined to fade away like so many others. The winter you were born, the rivers, froze early and the harvest failed. Mothers clutched their infants, trying to hush their cries with scraps of stale bread, while fathers gambled with desperation, either steal and risk death, or watch their families starve. You belong to the second group, the forgotten children of the poor. Your earliest memories are not of play or warmth, but of gnawing emptiness in your stomach. You remember the hollow sound of coins you never had, the cracked heels of your bare feet against frozen mud, and the way neighbors looked away when your mother begged for food. Charity was rare, suspicion plentiful. People whispered that hunger breeds thieves, and they weren't wrong. By the time you were 10, you had learned how to slip a crust from a market stall without being noticed. Survival was your only teacher, and its lessons were brutal. But you were clever. Clever enough to know that rules were written by those with full bellies. If you wanted to eat, you had to bend them until they broke. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. You watched older boys pick pockets, shadowed them through the alleys, mimicking their tricks. Soon, you were part of a shadow economy. Bread stolen from bakers, trinkets lifted from distracted merchants, coins pried from the drunkards who stumbled home too late at night. There was no innocence in your childhood, only necessity. Every adult you encountered taught you something different. The priests taught fear of hell, of sin, of unseen devils who supposedly lurked in every corner. The soldiers passing through taught cruelty, showing you that a blade and a loud voice could silence any argument. And the beggars taught cunning, how to invent stories that made strangers open their purses, how to fake a limp, how to weep on command. Slowly, you realized the world didn't pity children like you. It consumed them. The wealthy laughed from their carriages while your friends froze in the gutter. Your own parents faded from memory. Some said your father vanished in war. Others claimed your mother succumbed to sickness. What mattered was that you were alone. And when a boy is left, alone in a world that shows him no mercy, he begins to admire cruelty more than kindness. This was the soil from which your legend grew. Not the legend of a hero or martyr, but of something far darker. You learned early that hunger has no conscience and survival has no limits. When others recoiled from lies, you embraced them. When others cried at injustice, you smiled and looked for ways to profit from it. By the time you reached adolescence, your reputation already preceded you. Villagers muttered warnings about a boy with restless eyes, too quick with his hands, too persuasive with his words. They were right to fear. You were no longer just surviving. You were evolving into something else entirely. And the world, though it did not yet realize it, was preparing to give you exactly the stage you needed. Chaos, war, and endless opportunity for someone willing to descend into darkness. The day you left the village, you were barely more than a skeleton wrapped in rags. No one stopped you. No one begged you to stay. For a boy like you, the road was both exile and freedom. And it was on that road that you met the men who would shape you into something far more dangerous than a starving beggar. They were soldiers once, mercenaries who had fought in wars that left nothing but ashes behind. Now, stripped of cause and coin, they lived as wolves on the edges of society. When you stumbled upon their campfire, they saw not a threat but a tool. Small, hungry, desperate, and quick with your words. They gave you scraps of meat and in return demanded your loyalty. It was with them that you learned the true trade of survival, violence. They showed you how to hold a dagger, not like a kitchen knife, but like an extension of your arm. They taught knew how to strike first and fast, because hesitation was death. They drilled you in silence, in the art of waiting hours in a ditch until a lone traveler appeared, then springing like a shadow. For the first time you felt belonging. Around their fires, cruelty was celebrated, not condemned. Each man boasted of raids, of ambushes, of riches snatched from trembling hands. You listened, absorbing their tales like scripture. To them, law was a joke and mercy a weakness. The only real sin was getting caught. Soon, you were no longer the boy fetching water and cleaning weapons. You were one of them. The youngest, yes, but also the boldest. When they debated whether to rob a merchant or let him pass, you were the one who argued for action. When they hesitated at the thought of guards, you volunteered to slip through shadows and cut the tethered horses. Your daring earned their respect. But respect in a thieves' camp came with a price. You had to prove yourself again and again. Each theft grew riskier, each ambush bloodier. And with every act, you felt something shift inside you. The fear that once gnawed at your heart began to fade. In its place rose a thrill, a hunger not for bread but for control. Watching travelers cower before you, hearing their trembling voices beg for mercy. It was intoxicating. You were no longer the starving child on the roadside. You were becoming something else, a leader in the making. And the men around you saw it too. They began to follow your suggestions more than those of older veterans. They looked to you for boldness, for the kind of ruthless imagination only someone raised in desperation could conjure. What began as survival was turning into appetite. The gang was no longer just a shield against hunger. It was the stage on which your darker nature could flourish. You had found your family, your army, your audience, and with them at your side, the world would soon learn your name in whispers as both thief and predator. You had already mastered the tricks of theft, the thrill of ambush, the cruel joy of seeing others tremble before you. But there was one thing the road could never give you: certainty. Every raid was a gamble. Every strike a risk, and you hated risk. You wanted power that no blade could counter, no prison could contain. That was when the whispers began. At first, they were nothing more than drunken tales shared around a smoky tavern fire. Old mercenaries swore that in certain dark forests, men could bargain with forces older than the church itself. Powers that could turn lead into gold, cloak a man from his enemies, or make him untouchable on the battlefield. To most, these were tales for scaring children or mocking priests. But to you, they sounded like opportunity. You began asking questions where wiser men would stay silent. At first, the villagers laughed at your curiosity, but laughter turned to unease when they realized you weren't mocking. You were serious. They told you about strangers who walked alone at night, about black-robed figures who sold charms and whispered spells in exchange for coin or blood. They warned you that dabbling in such things was a sin worse than murder, but warnings only sharpened your hunger. The gang soon noticed your new obsession. Some mocked you, calling you a dreamer, chasing shadows. Others grew uneasy, whispering that you were inviting doom upon all of them. But you didn't care. You sought out wandering alchemists, hedge wizards, even charlatans with more tricks than magic. Each promised more than they delivered, but every failure only deepened your conviction. True power had to exist somewhere, hidden behind veils of ritual and secrecy. Then came the night in the forest. You still remember the heavy silence of the trees, the firelight flickering on the stranger's face. He was no mere trickster. His eyes were too sharp, his words too measured. He offered you more than potions and trinkets. He offered you a pact, not a contract written on paper, but one etched in secrecy and sealed in ritual. What exactly you promised that night remains blurred even in your memory. Was it your soul? Your loyalty? Or perhaps only your willingness to do whatever it took? What you remember clearly are the objects he gave you. Scraps of parchment with sigils, powders that smoked with unnatural colors, and most of all, the instructions. What to do, what to chant, what to sacrifice. You returned to camp different. The others noticed the way you carried yourself, the way you began drawing strange marks in the dirt before a raid, muttering words no one else understood. At first, they laughed. Then, when raids began to succeed with uncanny precision, their laughter died. Ambushes went smoother. Guards fell asleep on their posts. Merchants lost their way and wandered right into your traps. Coin and blood flowed with a strange regularity, as though fate itself had bent to your will. Was it truly magic, or only coincidence sharpened by fear? Even you weren't certain. But what mattered was that others believed. They began to fear you, not just as a ruthless thief, but as something more, a man who had bargained with shadows. And fear, you discovered, was more valuable than gold. From that moment on, you were no longer simply a criminal. You were a figure of legend. Parents warned their children that you could summon spirits if angered. Your own men lowered their voices when speaking your name at night. You had gained a new weapon, not steel, but superstition, and soon you would use it to open doors that no ordinary thief could ever touch. It began quietly. No great outcry, no blood in the streets, just whispers of boys who never came home. The kind of whispers that villages learned to ignore, because to acknowledge them meant admitting a nightmare was creeping into their lives. You knew exactly what you were doing. At first, it was only one or two. Poor families were easy prey, parents desperate for coin, children eager for adventure. You, or the men you commanded, would promise work at the camp, the chance to sing in the chapel, to serve in the kitchen, even to ride with the soldiers. For a hungry child, it was the promise of escape. For their parents, it was hope. But once those children crossed your threshold, hope ended. What began as curiosity, as the testing of boundaries, quickly became something darker. You had already tasted the thrill of control, watching travelers tremble, villagers cower. But children were different. Their fear was pure, untainted, almost intoxicating. Their obedience, when broken, was absolute. You told yourself it was for ritual. That was the story you repeated to your men, to yourself, that these acts served a greater purpose, that the powders and chants required innocent offerings. Perhaps you even believed it at first. The truth, though, was simpler. It fed something inside you that had been growing since childhood. Something that found satisfaction not in bread or coin, but in domination. Your men began to notice. Some averted their eyes, too frightened of you and your supposed magic to intervene. Others, perhaps hungrier for coin than conscience, helped you lure the children. They assured themselves that they weren't the ones doing the worst of it, that they were only following orders. And so the silence spread. The disappearances became patterns. Always boys, usually between 8 and 12, often poor enough that their absence could be dismissed as running away or sold into work. Villagers began whispering, but their whispers never left the taverns. After all, who would dare accuse you, a man rumoured to command dark forces? The first time you crossed the line, you told yourself it would be the last. But it wasn't. The ease with which you could lure them, the way the world seemed blind to their vanishing, encouraged you. You discovered that society had loopholes. Children of the poor could vanish without consequence. Each disappearance emboldened you. Each silence proved that the world was willing to ignore the suffering of its weakest. And soon, those whispers turned into stories. Mothers warning their children not to wander near your lands. Fathers clutching knives when strangers came too close to their homes. But fear worked in your favour. Because while fear could keep some away, it silenced many more. And in that silence, you thrived. The boy who had once stolen bread to survive had now discovered a darker feast, one that would shape the rest of your life. The first missing children were only the beginning, and history would never forget the path you had chosen, even if the villagers tried to erase the whispers from their own memories. You had once been just another outlaw, chasing coin and blood on the open roads, but by now you had discovered something far more profitable than gold. Silence. The silence of missing children. The silence of parents who were too poor or powerless to raise an alarm. The silence of a world that turned its face away. And silence could be turned into a system, into a machinery that worked with terrifying precision. It began with simple tricks. Your men would wander into markets or village fairs, smiling, generous, offering food or coins. They would choose carefully. Boys who looked young enough to trust, old enough to follow, but vulnerable enough that no one would search too hard for them. They whispered promises of work, serving in a wealthy household, tending horses, learning, a trade. Some spoke of music, of choirs, of opportunities in the church. Parents, worn down by hunger, believed them. They wanted to believe. Soon, the tricks became a process. Certain men were designated recruiters. They dressed better, spoke with more confidence, carried themselves like trustworthy travelers. They went in pairs, sometimes 3 at a time, offering not just coin, but protection. "We serve a great master," they would say. "He takes care of his boys. He will feed them, clothe them, make them men of honor." Your reputation as a feared outlaw became an advantage. No one would dare confront you directly, but many whispered that perhaps your household was safer than the world outside. After all, who would harm the children of a man so protected by shadows? In some places, parents even convinced themselves they were securing a better life for their sons, a chance to escape poverty, to be under the watch of someone powerful. You made sure the system had layers. New recruits were brought not straight to you, but to safe houses scattered across the countryside. Old barns, abandoned mills, forest cabins. There they were kept for days, sometimes weeks, until suspicion faded. The children were fed, even pampered, lulled into trust. Then, when the moment was right, they were taken deeper into your territory, into the chambers that only your closest men knew about. The numbers began to grow. What had once been chance encounters turned into quotas. You began expecting your men to deliver new boys regularly, threatening them with the same cruelty you inflicted on your captives if they failed. A rhythm emerged. Each new moon, a batch of fresh faces, and soon you no longer needed to lure them yourself. You had built an apparatus, efficient, invisible, horrifyingly effective. Some of your followers began to falter. They looked at the children too long, their consciences gnawing at them. They wondered how long the silence could last. You noticed their hesitation, and hesitation in your world was weakness. So you made examples. A man who failed to deliver was beaten before the others. A servant who tried to warn a family vanished himself, swallowed into the same darkness he had feared. Fear and loyalty fused together, creating a circle of complicity. They no longer dared to resist. And besides, many had grown too accustomed to the rewards, the gold you shared, the food you provided, the false sense of safety under your command. As long as you stood at the center of it, no one dared to break the machinery. The villagers, too, learned to live with it. When their sons disappeared, they wept quietly, but rarely sought justice. Some whispered that the children had been taken for the army, others that the plague had carried them off, still others that they had simply run away. Few dared to speak your name. Fewer still dared to accuse. After all, accusing a man said to command spirits was a dangerous thing. And so, the silence thickened, a silence that was not accidental, but cultivated, manipulated, transformed into a shield for your crimes. What had begun as a few disappearances had become an organized, relentless system, a system that only you controlled and that no one dared to challenge. You told yourself it was never just cruelty. You told yourself it was ritual, ceremony, a higher calling. And perhaps, in some corner of your mind, you even believed it, because believing was easier than admitting the truth. The chambers where you worked were not simple rooms. They were arranged with care, like a theatre stage. Candles lined the walls, their smoke curling into strange shapes. Symbols were carved into the wooden beams, drawn on the floor with powders that glimmered in the firelight. On a table sat objects that once belonged to churches, chalices, crosses, altar cloths, stolen or bought, then repurposed for your own inverted purposes. When the children entered these chambers, they were greeted not with kindness, but with the weight of ritual. You made them kneel, chant words they did not understand, participate in mock ceremonies that parodied the very faith their parents clung to. Sometimes you dressed in robes, pretending to be a priest of a darker order. Sometimes you demanded silence as though the chamber itself was a cathedral. Why this ritual? Perhaps it gave you the illusion of control, of meaning. Perhaps it was a way to convince yourself that you were not merely indulging in cruelty, but serving some higher power. But to the children, it was confusion first, terror second, despair always. They understood nothing of your chants, but they understood the look in your eyes, the fear in their own hearts. Your men watched, some fascinated, some horrified, but none daring to intervene. They had come to believe that these rituals gave you power, that the darkness you invoked protected them from the law, from enemies, even from death itself. And in a way it did, for as long as they believed, your legend grew. And legends, in the Middle Ages, were stronger than truth. Each ritual followed a pattern. First, the pretense of kindness, food, music, gentle words. Then the stripping away. The prayers turned mocking, the sacred objects turned twisted. Then came the climax, when you forced them to participate in acts that scarred not only their bodies, but their spirits. You convinced yourself that each ritual was an offering, that the fear itself was fuel for whatever force you believed guided you. Over time, the rituals became more elaborate. You demanded certain numbers of candles, certain times of night, certain phases of the moon. You spoke of summoning something greater, of binding yourself to a power that would keep you rich, feared, immortal. Whether you truly believed or merely acted out your fantasies hardly mattered. What mattered was that you convinced yourself, and by extension, everyone around you. But deep down, you knew the truth. It was not spirits who demanded these rituals. It was you, the boy who had once been powerless, now taking from the powerless whatever he wished. The rituals were not religion. They were theatre, dark, cruel theatre. And the children were your unwilling actors. And yet you continued, because each ritual was not only an act of cruelty, but also a declaration. A declaration that no one could stop you, that you were untouchable, that the laws of men and God alike bent beneath your will. You told yourself you were making offerings, but the only altar you truly worshipped at was your own hunger. And in that hunger, you found a terrible kind of faith. By now, you didn't need to raise your sword to control people. Your legend did the work for you. Fear was your greatest ally, and in the villages scattered across the German countryside, your name was already whispered with trembling lips. Parents invoked it at night, warning their children to stay inside, lest the Dark Rider take them. It didn't matter whether half of the stories were true. In fact, exaggeration only served you better. Word spread that you could turn yourself invisible, that you could fly across forests on a single breath, that you drank the blood of the young to extend your life. Priests thundered about demons and witches, and they did not hesitate to name you as proof that Satan still roamed freely in the world. And yet this fear, meant to condemn you, became your greatest shield. Because once people believed you were more than human, they no longer resisted. Entire villages paid tribute just to avoid your shadow. Merchants traveling along lonely roads threw down their goods at the sight of your men, convinced that resistance would invite something worse than death. Hunters in the forest swore they saw your figure shimmering in the mist, a spirit more than a man. And the children, the children learned to run at the mention of your name. But fear worked strangely on parents. Instead of uniting them in rebellion, it divided them. Some tried to hide their sons more carefully, locking them indoors, never letting them wander. Others whispered that perhaps surrendering one child was safer than losing an entire family to your wrath. Your myth had done what no blade could. It broke the will of entire communities. Of course, you encouraged it. You left traces where you wanted them. Strange carvings on doors, strange symbols on crossroads, bones placed where they would be discovered. You cultivated your reputation not only as a bandit, but as something supernatural. Sometimes you appeared in broad daylight just to let everyone see you unharmed, untouchable. Then you vanished again, feeding the impression that you could slip between worlds. The authorities tried to act. Flyers were nailed to posts, offering rewards for your capture. Town criers read your description in public squares. But the problem was not just that you evaded them, it was that the people themselves no longer trusted the law. They believed the sheriffs and bishops were powerless against you. Why risk your life reporting what no earthly force could stop? You understood a truth older than kingdoms. Fear spreads faster than armies. Every rumor was another brick in the fortress around you. And the more terrifying the story, the safer you became. But fear is a double-edged sword. As much as it protected you, it also isolated you. Your own men began to look at you differently, not as a leader of flesh and blood, but as something monstrous. Some whispered prayers when you walked past. Others dared not meet your eyes, convinced they would see the devil himself staring back. You had become a legend, but a legend consumes the man behind it, and you accepted it. Because in the end, wasn't that what you wanted all along? To be untouchable, unforgettable, immortal in fear. The growing legend was no accident. It was your masterpiece. You think you can keep hiding forever. For years, the roads, the taverns, and the quiet villages have been your stage, your hunting ground, your kingdom of shadows. Each time a child goes missing, each time a family weeps by a cold hearth with no answers, you move on to the next hamlet, carrying your secrets in the heavy leather pouch slung at your side. And for a while, it works. People whisper. People fear. But no one dares speak too loudly. After all, who could accuse a passing traveller when misfortune was as common as rain in this unforgiving age? But something is changing. Slowly, the silence begins to crack. In one village, a mother swears she saw her boy follow you to the edge of the forest before vanishing. In another, a shepherd claims he recognized your face on the road the very morning a girl disappeared. These are small voices at first, nothing more than frightened gossip muttered over market stalls or whispered between neighbors after dark. Yet gossip is a dangerous seed. Plant it often enough and it takes root, sprouting into rumor, and rumor soon becomes accusation. You notice it in the way people look at you. Where once they offered bread and ale to a weary traveller, now they cross themselves as you pass. Children are called indoors when you appear on the horizon. The innkeeper's smiles are strained, and the tavern benches seem to shift away from where you sit. Fear has curdled into suspicion, and suspicion into something harder, something sharper, the will to act. The church, too, begins to take notice. Priests, hearing confessions from trembling villagers, start to connect the stories. A child gone here, another gone there, always after the same stranger with a dark beard and a pack too heavy for a normal man to carry. In their sermons, they no longer speak only of sin and salvation, but of demons walking among men. They describe you without naming you, a figure cloaked in shadows, a wolf in the shape of a man. Each sermon fans the flames higher, and the villagers leave the church not only with fear, but with conviction that evil has a face, and that it wears the face of a traveller they have seen before. You, of course, notice the change. Suspicion follows you like a second shadow. The marketplace, once your hunting ground, becomes dangerous territory. Every glance feels longer, every question sharper. "Where are you from, stranger?" a farmer asks with eyes that linger too long. "What is it you carry in that pack?" A soldier at a roadside post inquires, his hand tightening around his spear. And you know the truth. The pack itself has become your greatest liability. For inside it lies the evidence of all your sins, a grotesque collection of tokens and remains you cannot bear to part with. It is your pride, your talisman, but also the noose tightening around your neck. the walls of rumor close in tighter. Merchants traveling between towns begin to share stories of the same man appearing wherever children vanish. Sketches, crude yet recognizable, begin to circulate. Not official proclamations, not yet, but charcoal drawings passed hand to hand, tacked to tavern doors when no one is looking. Your face is becoming a legend, and legends cannot hide in plain sight for long. The church escalates. Monks spread word across parishes, warning travelers to guard their young and to watch for signs of a man marked by Satan's hand. They describe not only your face, but your mannerisms, the way you never settle long in one place, the way you keep to shadows even in daylight, the restless eyes that scan every crowd as if measuring each soul. Priests call for prayer, but also for vigilance. The pulpit has turned into a weapon aimed at you, and every sermon adds another hunter to the silent army forming in the countryside. Still, you continue, because what else is left for you but the hunger that drives you? Yet even as you move from place to place, you can feel the noose tightening. Doors that once opened with trust now slam shut. Villages where you might once have lingered for weeks now turn hostile in days. People track your movements in ways they never dared before. And the church, persistent, patient, tireless, keeps building the case against you. The shadows that once protected you are thinning, and for the first time in years, you feel something gnaw at the edges of your confidence. Not guilt, never guilt, but the creeping certainty that the world is finally learning your name. You have outrun whispers for years. You have stepped over suspicion, vanished into forests, reappeared in towns where no one yet knows your name. But now the air itself feels heavy with watchfulness. Every path you take feels lined with eyes. Every tavern feels like a trap. You sit at a rough wooden table, pretending to drink, pretending to be weary from travel. But in truth, you are listening, always listening, for the words you fear most, his name. And you hear it more often now, not openly, not shouted, but quietly, murmured between a merchant and a farmer, between two soldiers trading gossip by the fire. A name carried on the smoke of taverns and the echo of church bells, Peter Niers. Sometimes they whisper it with dread, as if invoking a demon. Other times with anger, as if your very existence is an insult to their faith, their community, their safety. You hear your own legend being written while you are still alive, and there is no erasing ink once it has spilled so wide. The churches, warnings have taken root. Monks walk the roads in groups, muttering prayers not for themselves but against you. They carry little sketches of your face, copies made from crude charcoal but close enough for strangers to look twice when they see you. The pouch slung across, your back feels heavier each day, no longer just a secret but a beacon. To you it is power, to them it is proof. The chains bite into your wrists as they drag you from the cart. The village where you were taken has given you up, delivered you into the hands of men who wear the cross upon their cloaks. Now you stand not before a mob of frightened peasants, but before trained interrogators, officials of the church who see in you not just a criminal, but a living embodiment of the devil's handiwork. The chamber where they place you smells of damp stone and incense. Candles flicker, casting shadows that seem to move with a will of their own across the vaulted ceiling. In the corner sits a heavy wooden table, not for eating, but for records, because every word you utter here will be copied by scribes into neat lines of ink, each sentence destined to become part of the story of your downfall. They do not greet you with kindness. The first questions are sharp, hurled like daggers. Are you Peter Niers? Where did you come from? What burden lies in that sack you carry? You try at first to twist your answers, as you always have. You were a soldier, you say. You fought in wars, lived by your sword. The sack held nothing more than charms, little protections, harmless relics. But the interrogators are not villagers. They are not fooled by trembling denials. They press closer. One produces a bundle of papers, confessions from men who once travelled with you, deserters and thieves who knew your habits. Their words paint you already as guilty, their accusations sharp enough to draw blood without a blade. When your denial falters, they bring out the priest. His voice is calm, almost gentle, but it carries the weight of centuries. He asks, not what you did, but why. He speaks of sin, of contracts signed with the devil, of rituals whispered about in half a dozen villages. He tells you that souls are saved through confession, that even the vilest sinner can be redeemed if he admits his crimes. His eyes never leave yours, and you sense he believes every word. But confession is not simply requested, it is demanded. The first demonstration of force is subtle. They keep you without food, without water, your body weakening while their questions repeat day after day, like the tolling of a bell that will not stop. They let you hear the voices of other prisoners, screaming down the corridor, not telling you what is being done, but letting your imagination supply the rest. Then the instruments appear, ropes, pulleys, iron clamps. The sight alone is enough to dry your mouth. They do not yet use them to break bone or tear flesh. Not yet. Instead, they show you what could be. They tighten the ropes around your arms until your hands throb, then loosen them again. They suspend you just high enough that your toes barely brush the ground, leaving your shoulders to strain until your muscles tremble. Always, they pause before true damage is done, reminding you that the choice is yours. Words freely given, or pain until the words spill out anyway. And in those long hours, hunger gnawing, body aching, you begin to wonder whether silence has any value left. You have always thought yourself clever, always imagined you could outrun stories, but here inside these walls there is no escape. Every corridor ends in stone. Every question is another nail. They ask about the sack. Always the sack. What was inside? What power did you believe it carried? You try to dismiss it. Herbs, charms, trinkets. But the interrogators know otherwise. Witnesses claim to see more than charms. Tiny shapes wrapped in cloth. Remnants of what you had carried from place to place. They press harder. Their words, now accusations. That you sought to turn innocence into power. That you fed some hidden hunger by collecting what no man should. Your mouth opens, but no words come. Perhaps you do not even know what truth they want. Do they want demons named, rituals described? Or do they simply want to hear you admit what the world already believes? That you were not a man, but a monster clothed in human skin. At last, they leave you alone in the dark, chains clinking as you shift against the cold stone floor. The silence is louder than their questions, filled with the memory of every accusation, every rumor that has grown around your name. You realize now that they do not need truth. They only need confession. And one way or another, they will carve it from you. For the first time, you sense how the story will end. Not in escape, not in vanishing into the woods, but in words etched onto parchment, signed in your own trembling hand, sealed with the blood of every question you could not deny. Tonight, you are not asked if you are guilty. Tonight, you are taught that guilt is no longer a matter of choice. The bells toll across the town square, their iron tongues announcing not worship, but judgment. You are dragged from the chamber, where confession was squeezed from you, shackled and gaunt, your clothes little more than rags. When the door opens, the roar of voices surges like a wave. This is no private reckoning. This is a theatre, and you are both the villain and the entertainment. The square is packed. Farmers, merchants, mothers clutching children on their hips, all pressed together in anticipation. They have heard the stories, the sack, the rituals, the missing children. Rumors have grown in the telling until you are less man than myth. Some look at you with fear, others with satisfaction, still others with morbid curiosity. Everyone has come to see the monster. At the center of the square stands a wooden platform draped in black cloth. Upon it, a long table where judges and clerics sit, their robes heavy with authority. The bishop himself presides, flanked by scribes whose quills wait. eager to capture every word. To the side, a lectern stands ready for witnesses, while guards with halberds keep a tight circle to ensure no miracle of escape can disturb the performance. They push you forward until you collapse to your knees before the bench. The bishop's voice booms across the square. Peter Niers, you stand accused of crimes too numerous to recount, yet too grave to be ignored. Sorcery, heresy, murder, the corruption of the innocent. How do you answer these charges? The question is not really a question. Your answer has already been written in ink, signed in your unsteady hand after nights of interrogation. The confession sits on the table before the judges, a stack of parchment taller than any prayer book, each page a nail hammered into your coffin. Still, the ritual demands you respond. Your lips move, but the words catch in your throat. A murmur ripples through the crowd. They want a show. Some shout insults. Others spit toward the platform. You are no longer a man to them. You are a symbol of everything they fear. Witches, demons, evil that lurks behind closed doors. By condemning you, they believe they purge themselves. The first witness steps forward. He is a farmer, cap clutched in his hands, voice trembling as he speaks of a son who vanished after being promised work in a nearby town. He swears he saw you passing through the village with your cursed sack slung across your shoulder. Another follows, a woman with red-rimmed eyes, who wails that her nephew never returned from errands near the forest where you were last seen. Each testimony cuts deeper than any whip, for every face in the crowd seems to nod, to confirm, to believe. Your own words are read next. The scribe drones in a monotone, but the content is enough to electrify the crowd. You had admitted, whether freely or under duress, that you sought power in ways forbidden, that you carried remnants in your sack to fuel rituals, that you consorted with forces no Christian man should. The parchment trembles slightly in the scribe's hand as he reads, but the words are steady, and the audience drinks them like wine. You try to speak, to cry out that you were forced, that the ropes and the hunger had shaped your confession. But the moment you open your mouth, the guards strike you across the back, and your protest is swallowed by the laughter of the mob. To them, any denial is just another lie, another performance from the monster they've come to condemn. The judges confer, though the verdict was decided long before the trial began. Their words are ceremonial, draped in Latin phrases and legal formulas, but the meaning is simple. You are guilty, guilty of heresy, guilty of sorcery, guilty of crimes too black to cleanse. The sentence is death. But death will not be swift. The bishop announces that you will endure punishment in stages, so that the people may witness the justice of God unfold upon your flesh. First, you will be broken. Then, you will be burned. The crowd erupts, some cheering, some praying, all united in the belief that they are watching evil itself meet its rightful end. As the guards haul you away, you catch sight of children in the crowd, their wide eyes fixed on you. Some hide behind their mothers' skirts, others stare openly, memorizing the sight of the monster. You wonder what stories they will tell tonight at their hearths. You know already, they will speak of you as something less than human, a warning to frighten disobedient little ones into silence. Back in the dark of your cell, the noise of the trial still echoes in your ears. You realize the strangest thing of all, that the people needed you. They needed a monster to gather their fears into one body, to bind all their nightmares into your skin. By condemning you, they convince themselves the world is safer, purer, more righteous. You have become their sacrifice, not just for justice, but for peace of mind, and tomorrow the performance will continue. The morning arrives colder than you expected. The cell is damp, the straw beneath you sodden with mildew, and yet your body sweats with feverish dread. A guard rattles the iron door and growls that it is time. You rise slowly, every joint aching, shackles heavy on your wrists and ankles. This is the last walk you will ever take, and you know it. The corridor is narrow, lit only by torches that sputter in the draught. With each step, you hear your own chains clink, echoing like funeral bells. Ahead, the light brightens. Then you emerge into the open square where the crowd has already gathered. If yesterday's trial was theatre, today is spectacle, a public. Ritual meant not just to end your life, but to etch your name in infamy. The platform has been rebuilt overnight, transformed into a stage of execution. At its center stands the stake, tall and unyielding, surrounded by bundles of wood, stacked high and bound tight with rope. The smell of pitch and resin fills the air, sharp enough to sting your eyes. You know they have soaked the logs to ensure the fire burns hot and long. A murmur sweeps through the crowd as you appear. Farmers push forward. Merchants climb onto carts. Mothers hoist their children onto their shoulders. All want to see the monster fall. Some faces are grim, others eager, still others almost gleeful. The square hums with anticipation like a hive before the swarm. You are dragged to the stake. The guards bind your torso with coarse ropes that bite into your skin, knotting them tightly around your chest and arms. Your feet are secured with iron clamps. You are fixed upright, no longer able to move, no longer a man but an object on display. The bishop steps forward, holding a heavy book in his hands. His voice rises above the crowd. Peter Niers, you have been found guilty of heresy, sorcery, and crimes beyond measure. By the judgment of this court and the will of Almighty God, you are condemned to be purified by fire. The crowd roars its approval. Some cross themselves, others throw curses in your direction. Still others chant prayers to drown out any last words you might attempt. The executioner approaches. His face is expressionless beneath a leather hood, his movements practiced. He checks the ropes, adjusts the wood, then steps back to signal all is ready. Two assistants carry torches, their flames dancing orange in the pale daylight. The bishop asks if you have final words. Your mouth is dry, your throat raw, but you try to speak. The sound that comes out is a rasp, too faint to carry beyond the first few rows of onlookers. Perhaps you beg for mercy. Perhaps you curse the court. Perhaps you whisper a prayer you no longer believe. It does not matter. The crowd drowns you out with shouts of "Burn the witch" and "Justice." The torch is lower. At first, only smoke, curls upward, a grey haze that makes the crowd lean forward in impatience. Then the flames catch, small tongues licking at the resin-soaked wood. They grow quickly, feeding on the fuel, climbing higher until they brush against your legs. Heat sears your skin, smoke stings your eyes. You cough, gag, try to draw breath, but the air itself seems aflame. The world narrows to fire and sound, the crackling roar of wood, the jeers of the crowd, the pounding of your heart. You struggle against the ropes, but they hold. The flames bite deeper, climbing up your body. The pain is blinding, consuming, until thought itself begins to fragment. And then something strange happens. The crowd, which only moments ago seemed like a mob of tormentors, begins to blur into a single mass of faces, indistinct and ghostly. Their voices merge into one long droning hum. Time loses meaning. Your senses falter. The flames that once clawed at you now feel distant, muffled, as though you are already stepping away from your body. You realize dimly that this is the end not just of a man, but of a story. To them, you are no longer flesh and blood. You are legend, a warning, a shadow they will whisper to their children to keep them obedient. Behave, or you'll end up like Peter Niers. The last thing you see is the sky above, pale blue and indifferent, as the smoke rises to meet it. For a moment, you almost feel weightless, as though all the chains, all the ropes, all the whispers and accusations have burned away with you. Then there is only silence. When the fire finally dies, the crowd disperses, leaving behind little more than ash, charred wood, and the faint memory of a man who had become a monster in their eyes. And so ends your tale, consumed by fire, devoured by rumor, preserved forever in the terrible imagination of history.